Hi everyone, welcome to Her STEM Stories, brand new episode. And today I am so excited to talk to you all about how to curate your own STEM career. And if you're watching on live stream, please participate in the chat and ask our guests all your pressing questions. From engineering to manufacturing to R&D and all the way to becoming a strategic marketing professional, our guest today, Paula Garcia Todd, has maneuvered her career in STEM very carefully and efficiently. In this interview, we will get to know Paula's STEM story and her best advice on how you can strategically maneuver your career in STEM. Amongst many things, Paula is an if-then ambassador and a STEM education advocate and a community trailblazer. And she's also a mother of three. Let's talk to Paula for this amazing conversation and learn how you can create your own STEM path in STEM and beyond. Hi there, this is Prasha Dutra, and I'm passionate about helping you unlock your true potential in your science, technology, engineering, and mathematics career and beyond. Less than a decade ago, I moved to the US from India to live my American dream. I took my engineering career to the next level by starting my own consulting and coaching company while thriving at my 9-to-5 job. Money, time management, career planning, and personal growth are all things we'll discuss here. From expert guests and their stories to my own lessons, this show is an ongoing masterclass in how to believe in your brilliance and conquer your STEM career with confidence. Get a pen and paper and get ready for an education you wish you had in school. This is Her STEM Story, the podcast. Hi, Paula. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Prasha. So thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
Oh, this is so great. And I know we have been crossing paths on Clubhouse and different places, and I'm always in awe of your career journey. And before we get started, I definitely want to wish you a very happy Mother's Day.
Thank you. So sweet. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's awesome. And I'm sure there must be so many challenges while maneuvering your career and raising three kids. With that being said, how are you guys doing through the pandemic and different things that have been, creating a crazy world around us in the last year?
The pandemic's definitely been challenging, especially as a working mom. I have three kids. They're 13, 11, and 5, and they've all been at home. We've been doing the virtual school option. So I'm trying to manage work at the same time as I'm managing school hours and lunch hour and breakfast and all of that. It's been difficult, but we actually took advantage of the opportunity of when everything kind of shut down. We actually packed up and we went over to my in-laws' house and we spent 5 months with them. And it was an incredible time that even the kids felt like they got a chance to really spend a lot of time with grandma and grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
My husband and I both got the extra help that we needed to manage the kids while working. And it was really a blessing. It was a wonderful time that we spent during quarantine with grandma and grandpa. Yeah.
You get to realize how less time you spend with family, right? Like we were thinking about that too. My mother was here for Christmas time and we spent the entire time. And my mom was like, maybe when you were like a baby, that was the time we spent so much time together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was a blessing. I mean, it's obviously a very difficult time, but I think, we were able to make something very positive come out of this experience and situation. Yeah.
That's the best you can do anyways. So
yeah.
Awesome. So before we get started about all things career planning, transitions, and the awesome stuff that you've been working on throughout your career, I would love to know a little bit about yourself and maybe a little bio for people to know who you are, where you come from, and what do you do?
Sure. I'm happy to provide that. So I'm originally from Brazil. I moved here when I was 9 years old. And it's funny because my whole family is from Chile and my parents happened to be living in Brazil when I was born there. And so I've always kind of felt like I've never really been in a place where I belong, right? Because even growing up in Brazil, I was coming from a Chilean family. We come to the US. then obviously I'm trying to assimilate and become Americanized, but I'm never really fully American, and I'm never really fully Latina because I came here at such a young age. It's kind of a weird place to be in, but I tend to share that because I think a lot of people have that feeling. A lot of people have that feeling sometimes where they're like, where do I truly belong? I'm not 100% this, 100% that. And honestly, we're all like that. We're all a little bit of that, And anyways, I came here when I was 9, didn't speak a word of English. So, went into school. First day of school, my mom dropped me off. She said, hey, you're going to hate me right now. Someday you're going to thank me. I'm just going to drop you off. Good luck. I'll be here at 3 o'clock to pick you up. And she just left me there. And I was terrified. But it was probably the smartest thing she could have done because I learned English very quickly because I had to. And I, assimilated into a new culture very quickly because I had to. I come from a family of engineers.
Mhm.
So my father, my grandfather, my uncles, both my older brothers, they're all engineers. So I was really fortunate to grow up in an environment where no one ever asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. Everyone always asked me what types of problems I wanted to solve. And I was always really annoyed by that it was like an assumption that I would become an engineer. But looking back on it, like how lucky that it was never questioned whether I could become an engineer. Like it was like, hey, you have all the power in the world to fix problems. What problems are you going to go for? So what type of engineering are you going to study? And it really worked out for me. So I chose the pharmaceutical path, which led me down into chemical engineering. And I've worked in pharmaceuticals for 18 years, which has been extremely satisfying because that's what I wanted to do,
Yeah.
in very different roles, which, we'll get to, we'll talk about. But that engineering foundation gave me exactly what I wanted to be able to do what I wanted with my career. So it's been great.
I love that. However, I noticed that only the men in your family were
Yep.
engineers. So you're probably the first woman engineer,
That is
right?
correct. That is correct. Yes, I had a lot of role models, and they were all men. So
Yeah.
yes, and for that reason, I've decided to put myself out there as a role model myself, right? To be the role model that I never had as being a woman in engineering. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that that diverse background that you have and, diverse problems that you've solved, not only, pre-engineering, right? Like learning English on your own or
Yeah.
coming into a new environment and sort of maneuvering it. You develop life skills. And I think this is the big case for diversity and inclusion is that, if we have people with diverse backgrounds and experiences, then when new problems show up, they'll be able to derive or l- learn from those and be able to help us in engineering, right?
100% agree with all of that. Yes.
Yeah, and so I
Yes.
love complex backgrounds because I have my one myself, and it just I totally feel you. Like
Yeah.
I was always like probably the new kid, or the one with only mom working, and my mom was the only one working, and even today it's so crazy that she's one of the only moms who works, and I'm like, this is so crazy, right?
Yeah.
So having this diverse background, then how did that help you in your own career as well?
For sure. I mean, I think having a diverse background and just having, an understanding of cultures and international differences has certainly helped me in a lot of global roles, right? So, yeah, I speak Spanish and Portuguese, which helps, when managing South American clients and so forth. But even, traveling, I've been to China and all over Europe and Thailand, and it's just that understanding that every culture and every place that you visit is going to be slightly different, and you have to be respectful of that, and you have to be willing to learn about it. And so for sure, I think having that international background has helped me tremendously in having a global role. Yes.
Yeah. And in pharmacy, I think it's pharmaceutical industry, I think it's even more important, right? So asking
Yes.
questions like, what are we doing to have diverse clinical trials, or what are we doing
Yes.
to address, minority specific challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Huge challenges. And those areas have been hugely overlooked for so long, right? They definitely need to be addressed. Yes.
Yeah, because again, I mean, some of these sciences are again such a huge part of our lives that again the case for diversity keeps getting solidified when you think about it. Like more people of color were dying from COVID because,
Yes.
again, the research was so limited in those areas and sections of the society. And if we don't have diverse STEM people, then we're always going to, only cater to, the elitist or the majority of the people,
Yes.
while really the minorities continue to suffer. So that being said, you've moved through different departments, and I think this is something that people don't recognize about engineering. Sometimes we go to school for chemical engineering, especially women go to school for certain engineering types, and they sort of want to stick to it. And then, of course, at some point they plateau and don't really necessarily know the next steps or the paths. And I think employers are coming around and trying to figure this out too, but so much of it falls on our shoulders to sort of create our own path. And if we don't, then we
Yes.
sort of never make it to the top management positions and things like that. So tell us, how did you first ask for your promotion? What was if you have any memory of it or any tips that you actually used to ask for that first promotion?
Yeah, I wouldn't even call it a promotion. It's I think I learned very early on, in school, you learn that if you study hard, if you do your homework, you're rewarded, right? You get the grade that you're looking for. When you get into the work atmosphere, it's not like that, right? Like you're doing your work. Yes, you may get rewarded and that, your work may be recognized, but it doesn't necessarily lead to a promotion or to the next big project or things like that. You have to be vocal and you have to communicate your desires and you have to ask for it. And ironically, very early on, I started asking for things. And I wasn't asking necessarily for promotion, but I was
Mhm.
asking more for opportunities. So, for example, I came into a role where for like the first 6 months, I was working on like a very specific project. And I told my boss, I'm like, this is great. I'm happy to work on this, but I'd really like to better understand how this would then go into like a manufacturing setting. So help me understand like the scale up process. So then he put me like on a project that took me into the manufacturing setting, which I loved, which then turned into my next role, right? So I worked in process engineering, which I loved. And then from there, I started asking questions of, at that point I was manufacturing active pharmaceuticals. And sometimes, people would ask for very specific like material properties. And so I started to ask, why does particle size matter? And so then I went back into an R&D role that kind of led into those answers. But again, I started to verbalize and ask the questions like, I want to better understand drug formulation, because why are they asking these questions, right? Which led me back into R&D. And then from R&D, I did that for a few years. And then I started asking the question of, I'm innovating these new polymers, these new chemistries, which is great. But how am I supposed to really know what I should be working on without talking to the end customer, without understanding the pharmaceutical customers and what do they really need from, their formulations? So I asked again, I'm like, can I get into a role where I'm more customer facing? And so I'm able to ask these questions, right? And sure enough, within a year, I moved into what we call tech service, where I spent 4 or 5 years traveling the world, visiting pharmaceutical companies to better understand those things. So it's becomes a pattern of curiosity and verbalizing and communicating your desires and needs and the things that you want to learn more about. And then that kind of steers your career. But you're absolutely right, because if you don't verbalize anything, I might still be in that manufacturing setting now, 18 years later, if I hadn't asked the questions and just kind of pushed to better understand and to better grow personally myself, right? And then that has led from career path to career path to career path, right? So
Yeah. No, that's
yeah.
amazing. I think that's a great advice on like verbalizing what you want. And then, of course, the curiosity part. I think organizations do, at least in my opinion and in my experience, and this would be different for different industries and different types of settings, but they do value curiosity and people who want to
Yes.
learn and who want to offer or even get curious about the work that they're doing and interested and engaged, if you will.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, but tell us, how did you get that clarity? Because I think a lot of women are struggling to understand, hey, is this the right path for me? Is this the right time for me? Um,
Yeah,
How
those are
do
really hard questions. Yeah, because in the middle of all that, I was also balancing starting my family.
you?
And yeah, absolutely. I will tell you, I got into that role where I was traveling about 50% of my time. I had a 2 year old and a 6 month old at the time. It was super hard, right? But
Yeah.
I was committed to it. And so, that's the other thing, ask for help, right? So, I had my mother-in-law, she would come in and spend months at a time with us. I hired help to help me, keep up with the house and keep up with the kids and things like that, right? Like you can't do it all yourself sometimes. And so it's okay to ask for help when you need it.
Mhm.
But at every step that I took, every door that I crossed through, I always told myself, if this doesn't work out, I can always come right back out of that door and go somewhere else. Because that's the reality, right? And so it's okay to try things, not like them, and go elsewhere. And I think the biggest door that I walked through was about 8 years ago. I had a marketing director that approached me and said, "Hey, have you ever considered a job in marketing?" And at this point, I was doing that role where I was traveling, visiting all these customers, and I was like, I don't even know what marketing is. Like, I no, absolutely not, right? But he gave me that clarity. He goes, "Listen, like you understand our products
Yeah.
inside out because you've been working in R&D. You understand our customers inside and out. The marketing part I can teach you. That part I can do, right? But it's really hard for me to teach our new marketers what they need to know about our products and our customers and their needs, right? And so if you're willing to take this jump, I'm willing to help you through it." So I was like, I'm going to try it. And if it doesn't work out within a couple of years, I'll just move back out and
Exactly.
continue in the technical roles, right? But it really worked out for me. And then from there, I did product management and different types of marketing roles. And now I'm in strategic marketing. And I never went back to school for an MBA because sometimes we forget a lot of learning happens on the job, right? You don't necessarily have to go to a class to learn something. You can literally experience it to learn it as well.
And I think another thing about your story and your journey is that this importance of sticking in an industry or a company, because I think there's so much romanticizing of like changing jobs. And,
Yeah.
I know it works for a lot of people, but in my opinion, and through mentors and things like that, I've learned that that's probably a little bit harder and may have more resistance than, if you do like working for your current employer, look for ways to sort of stay and grow than just the first thought being, let's just leave, and it's like you can leverage more by staying because you have that knowledge.
Yeah, and you bring up a very valid point, right? Because if you're moving from company to company, you're kind of starting fresh every time in
Right.
like showing who you are and showing your work ethic and delivering on what you need to, your milestones and so forth. When you kind of stick within the same company or whatnot, there's a precedence that, like people understand where you've come from, what you've already accomplished. It it certainly helps you try new jobs, do new things because you've already kind of you have shown you have a record, right? That you can rely on and be like, hey, I've been a good employee all this time, right?
Right.
And but certainly if there's a good opportunity externally, like you shouldn't just dismiss it, right? So
Right.
it's like the weighing of the pros and the cons of staying in a company or moving elsewhere or in an industry, right? Like
Right.
for me within pharmaceuticals, yeah,
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 that's awesome. Because I think, again, if you mess up those first 5, 6 years of like constantly moving industries or constantly moving jobs, then you may be gaining a few $1,000s, maybe 10, 20. This, I would be surprised if you make more than, if you like double your salary by changing
yeah. No, that'd be
industries.
hard to do, right?
And so with that, like you got to assess like the long-term benefits of an opportunity versus the short term, because I think early on people are so either convinced that it has to be those big brands or it has to be those, big paychecks. But eventually 5, 6 years into the career, you recognize like money is, great and it's good to have, but it may not be that one factor that decides like what your career looks like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You really need to look at your whole happiness package,
Right.
especially now as a working mom. Like, yes, money is important, but flexibility. is what I
Exactly.
value the most, honestly, right? So, what really makes you happy? Sure, money's a component, but what else is really going to keep you happy, right? Yeah, you got to weigh it all. Yeah.
Awesome. So you found your set of ambitions or your set of curiosity, but then how did you align with it with your employer, right? So how did you find those sponsors who advocated and said, no, Paula can do this. Let's bring her in this team, because there's so much of that behind the scenes or, supporting you in rooms that you're not in that
Yeah.
needs to happen. And a lot of times women lose their career path because nobody would do that for them, or would nobody would do that for minorities. So how did you sort of create that good relationship with your employers and also create those sponsor sort of relations?
Yeah, it wasn't until I was in my R&D role. I remember it was like one of these performance review cycles where at my performance review, um, my manager at the time very clearly said, I reached out to some key influential people within our business, scientists and so forth, and nobody really knew what you were working on. And I thought to myself, well, I know what I'm working on and you know what I'm working on. Why does it matter that these people also have to know what I'm working on? And then that's how I learned about sponsors, to be honest. He
Mhm.
didn't say these are sponsors, right? But that's when I realized, wow, I need to even better communicate because there are other influential people that
Yes.
can be deciding my fate, right? As he pointed out. And so once I learned that, I actually just started to engage with them very casually, whether it be like a lunch or a coffee, or, I didn't necessarily ask people to be my sponsor, my mentor. I would just engage with them in a way that, get to know about them, let them learn more about me. I'd talk about my project. If I had a question, I'd go to them, how do you think I should manage this project? What do you think about these test results, right? And in just like that simple engagement, they started to learn more about me, right? And then they just naturally became sponsors, right? Simply because they knew me. And so that was a huge learning for me. And now, not that I feel like there's a difference between trying to network up and, try to get an edge that way. That's not really what you're trying to do. You're trying to understand who the influential people are, and you're just trying to build a connection with them. And once you build that connection, naturally they'll get to know who you are. And that's really important. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's so much value in authenticity versus
Yes.
strategy, right? Like you can't
Yes.
like everything can't be like strategy. Like some things you just do to know people, to give them, to understand them. And you bring up a great point that a lot of people don't know. And even I didn't know until I got into, managing people or learning more about performance reviews and things like that. But almost every company does calibrations, right? And
Yes.
even though a lot of companies have grown into like a 360 kind of approach, but still like there's a lot of like calibration, and a lot of us are still not there yet with those 360 reviews and things like that. And if you're in like hardcore engineering, like civil, mechanical, chemical, R&D roles, you're probably not working for Facebook. You're probably not working
Right.
for these big tech companies
Right.
that are,
Right.
redoing the whole calibration system or whole performance system. But the calibration is where, what you just mentioned, like, again, your ratings go up to the next level, and then all these people, different managers, different product, different groups come in and say, yes, this person is a high performer or not. And really, like, some of them have never worked with you and never seen
Absolutely.
you.
No, not at
Yeah.
all. Not at
Yeah.
all. Yeah. And that's actually an opportunity I took when I made the jump into marketing. Um, I kind of reintroduced myself to different functions within our business. So I reached out to quality and I said, hey, I'm now sitting in this marketing role. How can I help you? What are ways that we can work together? Right. Reached out to regulatory, reached out to supply chain, right? People that I never really connected with, again, in an authentic way, trying to understand, now that I sit in marketing, how can I help you? But at the same time, now you're building another connection. And to your point, when they're talking in that room, now you have a supply chain leader who knows about me, even though they've never worked with me, right?
Yeah.
So it's all about building connections.
Yeah, for sure. And then again, internal connections. I think there's so much
Yes.
focus on like this external network, and
Yeah.
how can my LinkedIn contact get me a job, which to me is so odd. Like I think that is just taking it too far and like going in the wrong direction, spending your resources, over spending your resources in that direction, but maybe using more resources for internal communication, internal
Yeah.
network, internal, 30 minutes catch up, intros, very
Yeah.
simple things you can do to get that sponsorship from people, which is, again, as you said, it's not, you're not going to say it out loud, you're just going to give them, how passionate you are for something, or
Yes.
state some of the roles. And I remember a few years ago, before I started her some story, I emailed our CEO, and I even told him about the fact that we were all women in the team at one point. And and then also after that, I even emailed him and said, how do you become a CEO? Like, that was something I didn't know. And he was so generous, and he got on a call with me for a whole hour and
Wow.
talked all about how to become a CEO. And I think we just somehow keep people on pedestals and get too afraid to connect authentically.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what would be your advice to someone who's an introvert? I know a lot of our audience is introverts, and they're like, I'm not so sure what to say to somebody. So what would be your, maybe a tip or a pro tip that introverts can use?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I can be introverted, but I'm naturally an extrovert. So, but one thing I will say is we all communicate our best slightly differently. And so
Mhm.
some people are really good at verbal communication. Some people are really good at communicating over email. Some people are better on the phone. Some people are better face to face, right? So kind of find like out of the communication styles, which one fits you most, which if you're an introvert, maybe you feel more comfortable over email, right? And that's okay. It still counts for you to reach out to someone over email, like electronically, do a virtual call or whatnot, right? Like all of those are still meaningful ways to start building those relationships. You don't necessarily have to be an extrovert and say, hey, let's go to lunch, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't have to be that way. You can still find ways to connect over email, like, hey, I have a problem in my project, and, given your role, what would be your advice? What are your thoughts on this problem? Like little things like that can go a long way.
Yeah, I think seeking support, right?
Yeah.
Seeking that help is important, and I think it makes people feel very important. And
Yes.
I
Yes.
think we all like that feeling.
Yeah, 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 for sure. Like you value their opinion, you value the support that they could give you towards a project. It makes them feel good, and then it opens them up to you. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. And then fast forward today, you have diversified into STEM advocacy,
Yeah.
and also you are a AAAS if then ambassador. So tell us, when did that sort of another addition to your already decorated career happen, and what was the story behind that?
Yeah. So I didn't do a lot of STEM outreach until I had children myself.
Mhm.
And then it started very simply just in going into their own schools, right? And doing chemistry and, making things explode or making polymers with kids, just like really easy things. And I quickly realized, because I'd get a lot of questions, especially from the boys, would be like, are you really a scientist? Are you really an engineer? Right. And I started to realize, I need to put myself out there more, because the picture that children see when they hear scientist or engineer, it's still that white male, right? And
Mhm.
I need to start changing the face of what it really looks like, right? And so I started to do a lot more outreach, different schools, different organizations, and so forth. And then in 2019, a friend of mine forwarded me this email that, AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, was looking for these ambassadors. So basically, they recruited 125 women across the U.S. in very diverse STEM roles, to serve as role models, right? To visit more middle schools and work with different organizations and so forth. And I threw my name in the hat, and I was like, I'm not going to get this. Like, why would I get this?
Mhm.
And I got it, which was incredible. And that honestly has just taken all of the outreach to another level,
Mhm.
because now instead, I'm based in Atlanta. A lot of the stuff I was doing was here. And now I'm able to be more national, right? So I'm able, especially with Zoom calls and everything, there's so many classrooms. I can visit a classroom in California. I can
Mhm.
collaborate with an organization in Delaware, Connecticut, right? Like, it's allowed me to be more national in all of the work that I do, and just visiting classrooms and talking to kids. So that's really been a fantastic experience.
Yeah, and it's a very decorated program. And, of course, if you're in the field of STEM and advocacy and outreach, I mean, it's one of those really, really, what do you call it, sought after um, titles, but
Yeah.
also, the organization itself does so much amazing work
Yes.
in the field of sciences, and also diversity inclusion. Their fellowships are amazing,
Yes.
and all that great stuff as well. Now that has sort of led you to start something like called Watch Me STEM, which is your title. I loved it so much. What are your sort of plans with that personal brand that you have, and this all this work you're doing and giving so much advice and so much inspiration on, like, I mean, I know you're from Clubhouse, but apart from that too, just on your social media networks too. So how do you think this is sort of going and growing?
Yeah. So until I was never on Instagram. I was on LinkedIn and so forth, right? But I was never on Instagram until I became an ambassador. And they really encouraged us to be on Instagram, to be able to reach the audience that we were trying to reach, right? Mostly middle school, but also high schoolers, and even STEM people that are in college looking to be professionals, ways that we can mentor, help, right? And so I went on a whim. I'm like, I'm going to create an Instagram page. I feel like a dinosaur. I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, this is like all brand new, right? But I think it goes back to what we were talking about, in terms of being your authentic self, right? Like, I keep this page as, a place where actually, if people reach out to me, if they, DM me or whatnot, I've set up calls with actually girls all over the world, right? I'm happy to spend time and talk to them or whatnot. But I'm just sharing little pieces of myself and the work that I do, and not just the work that I do in my job, but the outreach that I do, hoping, to provide some inspiration for others that may be interested in visiting a classroom. What do I do? How do I go about doing outreach? Just kind of putting myself out there, just as an example,
Mhm.
and just to provide different ideas. And it's been amazing. Instagram's been an amazing place to interact and collaborate with people. And I've seen really cool things come out of some of these, just friendly collaborations on Instagram. So that's been an amazing platform to meet other people, including yourself. You have
Yeah.
an amazing platform on Instagram. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. No, this is great. I love social media so much. And I know, a lot of times we don't even know what it's gonna become, right? Like who knows
Yeah.
what ideas come. And I feel like it does have its ups and downs, and it does come at the cost of like putting yourself out there and things like that. But at the same time, I think it does it's a very creative space if you can use it with boundaries, right? Like you can learn
Yes.
and you can get ideas. And I always find like you need to be so smart to put some of these reels together, or like these really catchy content, which is not easy. Like, I feel
Right.
like the most creative people are like people who create memes, and I'm like, this is like this is so great. Like they're tapping into something that, that's so simple but still like effectively communicates. And of course,
Yes.
being in marketing, you must appreciate that a lot.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. And then, you're in marketing and then doing all these things. What would be your advice for someone who's sort of trying to create this advocacy path? And, women are already multi-potentialites, so they want to do a lot of things at once. And I hear a lot of times, how do you find time? So maybe this is a good place to address that. 3 kids, wonderful job, global role. Of course, it seems like you have a ever growing ambition to keep growing, and then also this extra stuff on the side. How do you really find the time, and what would be your advice to women who also want to follow your path?
Yeah. So my first piece of advice is, when we talk about imposter syndrome, we tend to talk about career a lot, right? Like, am I good enough to do this job? Or do I have the right credentials to go into this type of function or whatnot, right? Um, I feel like there's an imposter syndrome even when it comes to like mentoring and being a role model. Um, and honestly, like, you don't have to be a CEO. You don't have to have 100 technical papers in your name. You don't have to be like, you know, this incredible, like impossible person to go out there and help other people and be a role
Mhm.
model and be a mentor and even get in front of a classroom and just help inspire, a group of sixth graders to consider a STEM career. I actually think that there's a lot more value in students really seeing and interacting with an everyday person in STEM, an everyday woman in STEM,
Mhm.
because it's more approachable and it's something that's more reachable and it's something that's more like not everyone's going to be CEO. That's okay, right? But there are so many people that have careers that they enjoy and they're able to balance their lives and they're able to do all the things that they want to do. Those are like the true role models that kids should be seeing every day. So don't think that you have to achieve all of these things to be able to share your experiences and talk to people about your career and inspire them. Just who you are is inspiration enough, right? So if you're considering doing outreach, you already have all that it takes to do it, right?
Yeah.
Um, in terms of time management, that's a tricky one. But what I often say is this outreach work that I do is become a hobby of mine. And so when I look at how I spend my time, right, so much of my time is going into work, so much of my time is going into my kids and my family, so much of my time is going into all these different things. And then I have this little bucket that's for outreach, right, or for, we'll call it hobbies. And for me, that's what that bucket is, right, the outreach. And if you prioritize it,
Mhm.
you'll always find ways to fit it into your day. And it might be a quick call that I do into a classroom over lunch hour, or I'll work with an organization at 6 o'clock at night or something, and I'm able to balance and make sure that I'm still getting more work done and I'm still hanging out with the kids and all of that, right? But it's if you prioritize it in your life, you'll find ways to fit it in and just find which bucket it fits in, right, within your life.
Yeah. And I think it comes, I mean, I think you would agree that it energizes you, right? This is
Yes,
what I
it does.
find so hard to explain to people.
Yeah,
Is
it really
that,
does.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
it's not about the 1 hour you spend or the 2 hours you spend. It's about the 5 hours you gained because you did this, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think people just,
100%.
yeah, don't understand that. And I'm like, you got to experience it. I don't know how to tell you this, but you have to experience how enriching some of these conversations can be, how it just makes you feel like you're contributing. And of course, you need to care about the topic, right? So a lot of times it's a bad fit in terms of, what
Yeah.
you're trying to do and who you really are. And if that's not a good fit, it's always going to be like de-energizing. But I guess if you could really identify like that one space in your life that is really, really energizing, and it can really help you become more I always say I learned so much from this side of my life, and I can bring it to my work, and then and to my family, and then I learned so much from all those areas, and I can bring it to this area. So it's a
Yeah.
really nice learning experience sort of in parallel. And I think you will have to give up some things, right? I'm sure.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
what do you
Yes.
think you give up, and what do you think is okay to give up for people? Because another big question, people are like, I don't have time. It's like you're not prioritizing, and you're spending time somewhere you don't want to spend time.
Right, right. No, it's a fair question. I'm not sure. I mean, I certainly see, some of my girlfriends, they go out to lunch, they do all those things, right? And, I may be talking to a classroom over lunch, so I'm unable to go to that lunch, right, that one time. But I also balance it out, right? That, the next time they do it, then, I'll find a way to make that work, right? And so, um, I do find myself that I'm not 100%, doing all the things that maybe this group is doing, or 100% doing the
Yeah.
things that this group is doing, but I am balancing in between those two groups. And honestly, I'm comfortable with that because, to your point, I'm energized by both of those activities. So I want both of them in my life. So I have to prioritize both, right?
That's awesome. It's like, you like ice cream, but you don't want to eat all the ice cream.
Right, right.
So you want to savor all these areas, and then hopefully you have a life which is rich enough that everything you do is like, adding that level of um, experience and energy in your life. So that if you're meeting girlfriends once a month, it's the best time ever. And then, you don't get involved in the drama and the day to
Yeah.
day. So it's
I
like,
hear that.
yeah, so like you really get to enjoy all areas of your life, even with family. Like you're not smothering them, you're like not constantly
Right.
on their, you're independent, and you
Right.
can do a lot of different things. So that's awesome. And so tell us, what is your superpower?
That's such a hard question. And what I find funny about the question about superpower is that most women are unable to identify what they're really good at because they
Mhm.
just assume everybody's good at that thing too. Like it's just like a natural thing, right? Like, oh, I'm really organized. Oh, everyone must be organized, or right?
Yeah.
Like, but once you really identify like those things, right? Like those are the things that you should really find ways to better use and utilize. And that's, how you can, really make yourself succeed even more. But for me personally, I think my superpower is my optimism.
Mm.
I tend to be a very optimistic person, and overly optimistic, sometimes like crazy, like it's all going to work out, we're going to, like, but I think that attitude, coming into any difficult situation with an I can attitude, already puts me, I feel like, ahead of someone who's coming into it already kind of feeling defeated and being like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? Right. Like, yes, this is difficult, but I know that we're going to be able to. And again, that might be from that my upbringing of, like, what are the problems you're going to solve? Like, to me, like, everything is solvable, maybe not overnight. It'll take time, it'll take a lot of work and effort. But in a way, everything has its way of being solved and coming to a better place. And so I think my superpower is that optimism, because I bring that to everything that I do.
Yeah, that's
That's what I
beautiful.
would say.
We
Yeah.
need more optimistic leaders, right?
Yes.
We need more optimism in this world for sure. And then,
Yeah.
what will be your advice to help women in STEM believe in their brilliance?
Um, like, don't put yourself in boxes. Sometimes I feel like we're really good at almost putting ourselves in these silos that we create ourselves. I don't know why
Mm-hmm.
we do that, right? Don't put yourself in the silo, and don't think that just because you haven't had an experience, it doesn't mean that you're not worthy of trying that experience and putting yourself out there and doing it, right? So I always follow this rule. Like when I'm looking at a new job, I like to do what I call like a 50-50 rule, where about 50% of that role is something that I understand. It's something that I'm going to be able to contribute towards because I'm like, okay, I've seen this, I've done this, I know how to maneuver this. But then the other 50% is something completely new. So then that way you're always stretching yourself and learning and trying new things, right? So don't silo yourself. Don't feel like you have to know 100% of everything to go into that next role. Maybe that 50-50 rule is something that might be useful for you to think about, right? As you're looking at the next role, the next function, whatever it is that you want to try next. If you know a little bit, good. If you don't know a little bit, good, right?
Yeah,
You want to feel comfortable in that space of I know a little, but not all.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. You stated it perfectly, and I think that's so important. And I think men do this all the time, right?
All
Like
the
they don't
time.
apply for jobs
All the
they
time.
don't qualify for, and with
Yeah.
just with that confidence, they land it. And just because they raised their hands or they presented themselves in a way that they could convince the other person to hire them. And women, I think, focus so much on what we don't have or where we
Yeah.
lack versus what
Yes.
we're good at. So that is a great advice. And before we let you go, I want to know, what's your favorite book?
Um, as a mom, I don't have a lot of time to read books
Mhm.
anymore. I'm more of like a podcast junkie. So like I'm
No?
listening to things, I'm like cooking or whatnot. But um before the pandemic, I do read a lot of books, especially on flights, because I do tend to travel a lot for my job. And the one book that I read last year so there are two books that I would recommend. One is The Moment of Lift by
Mhm.
Melinda Gates. That is a very inspiring, like I loved that book. Very inspirational. The other one, and I'm sure you may have heard of this as well. It's called Invisible Women. Have you read
Mhm.
that book yet? Yeah. So that's a
Mhm.
really, really great one. I think her name is Caroline. Um, Caroline Criado Perez is the author's name. And that was very eye-opening as well, just in different ways that, again, if you don't have the diversity, if you don't have the perspective of women, you're losing out on ways to improve the lives of women and men across the world, honestly, right? So those are two really good books.
I love that. And then tell us where our audience can find you, support your work, and really get to engage with you more.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm on Instagram at Watch Me STEM. I'm also on Twitter, same handle at Watch Me STEM, and I'm also on LinkedIn. So Paula Garcia Todd, just look me up. And like I said, I'm happy to engage with folks. Send me a message if you're interested in outreach, if you're interested in chemical engineering, if you want to, if there are any ways that I can support and help you, I'm happy to engage. So feel free to reach out.
Awesome. We love that. And again, wishing you happy Mother's Day one more
Thank
time.
you.
And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. And that was Paula Garcia Todd with her amazing STEM story. Please follow her by using the links in the episode notes, and join us again next week for a brand new episode of Her STEM Story, which is your weekly STEM masterclass. And subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you're listening. Thank you so much for joining us.